Welcome. There are more of you than there were this morning, which is a good thing. For the people who have just joined us, there were about 150 of GA4GH hardcore standards people beavering away all today. There's some people who are a bit, I think, over geeked now and ready for a bit more relaxing. But this is the transition from our internal working day over to the next 2 days, which is the GA4GH plenary. This is our biggest ever plenary. I'm not sure if you're 500 people. You don't look like 500 people or 450. So I think there's going to be more arriving tonight for tomorrow. But this is a welcome for this. So what are we going to be doing over the next 2 days? We're going to be sharing updates on the standards and policy frameworks that we make. This is GA4GH's core business. We're a standards setting organization. We don't manage data. We don't implement. What we do is we create standards that enable responsible data sharing. We then are a sort of support group for the people who adopt and put those standards into practice. So this is not just a theoretical exercise. For all the people, or for many of the people involved, the reason why they're part of GA4GH is to make these standards work. There are a series of things that happen sort of with us and around us, and we're very proud that we are a place where we convene people. And so there are people who come here for the standards, but they stay for all the other things that come along with it. So a good example of that is the Genome Pri meeting, the Genome Privacy workshop. And another one is the national initiatives under GA4GH. And overall, we're trying to bring together both a global community and what I think is sometimes a bigger gap, the research to healthcare community inside of countries and between countries. So people who are focused on genomic research meeting the people who are interested in implementing genomics in healthcare and the synergy that happens between those two. We have done a lot since last year in Basel. So I just want to zip through this. So we had a series of standards that were approved this time last year. We had a change in the leadership, a number of changes. So at the top, Heidi Rehm joined us on the executive team. And we had a number of new workstream leads, Tommy Narigan and Michael Bordis, both card-carrying Europeans, joining, leading their different work streams. We provided a new publication, but in February 2019, 8 new GA4GH driver projects were announced. And I'm particularly happy about the spread, the global spread of our driver projects now. So that includes GEM Japan, it includes H3 Africa, includes the Swiss Personalized Health Network, as well as many of the other global resources and European resources that we have. We approved another standard in February, the data use ontology, and extensions to the Beacon API were released. We had another change in leadership of work streams with David Birney and Jean-Pierre Hubenet, JP to his friends, taking on the leadership of the security work streams. In May of this year, we formalized the agreement between Elixir and GA4GH. This is an alignment between two organizations, Elixir being the European Coordination of Bioinformatics, and GA4GH being this global standard setting organization. And it allows GA4GH to reach far deeper into Europe, and at the same time allows Elixir to be aligned to this global process and influence this global process. We updated our regulatory and ethics policies, and then what you'll be hearing today, and officially it happens tomorrow, is we have 6 new standards being released. So these are the 8 new driver projects, as well as these different country-level projects, such as the Swiss Personalized Health Network and GEM Japan. We have a number of cases which really go between countries, such as EpiShare, EU CAN-CAN, and Autism Sharing Initiative, the European Joint Programme for Rare Diseases. I'm particularly happy again to highlight the way our colleagues from across the continent of Africa joining, and that rounds out the way GA4GH is distributed in terms of driver projects around the world. These driver projects were selected through a rigorous external review committee, and we'll be hearing from the chair of that later on. This is the alliance between Elixir and GA4GH, which I talked through. I have stupidly, should have waited for the slides. But the other the other aspect that we've been working hard on in the executive team, mainly via Peter Goodhand here, has been bringing together GA4GH as part of a standards community. And there are 2 particular organizations that we're close to. The first is HL7 FHIR. This is the electronic health care records group, and the coordination of the standards around that. And the second one is this soup to nuts standards organization, ISO, and we're associated with Bron Kissler's TC215. They know how to name their standards committees in ISO, and so we're associated with HL7 for this, for the coordination of these standards organizations. What does this mean in practice? It means more joint working groups between these organizations so that the standard used to represent genomic data, for example, an electronic healthcare record, is the same standard that can be used for research. And so we realize that joint space between these standards organizations. I should mention in particular Bob Freemuth. I don't know where Bob is, but Bob is one of the examples of these switch hitters who go between GA4GH and HL7 FHIR. Bob also has had another important role here about setting up this plenary. So thank you very much to Bob and this committee members. I'm really looking forward to the next 2 days. I've already enjoyed today greatly. And to put together really quite a packed schedule over the next 48 hours. And we also could not do this, obviously, without our funders. GA4GH is, at its core, an agreement between these 3 host institutions, OICR, the Wellcome Sanger Institute, and the Broad Institute. And we have generous support from a variety of funders, in particular in Canada, CanShare, the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and the NIH in the US. The plenary itself is also generously sponsored by these wonderful institutions, Genome Canada, Google Cloud, AbbVie, Illumina, Microsoft, and Vertex. So this is a little sneak peek to tomorrow, where these will be officially announced in what I describe as the fire hose session, where GA4GH does rapid dissemination of everything it's done. And in particular, there's a real gamut here of different standards that GA4GH has been working on over the last year. And they go from the very, very fundamental, such as the encrypting files at rest in a way that can work for genomic pipelines, through to far more almost philosophical data models, and that's, for example, the definition of how you represent a variation on the genome in variant representation. So with that, I welcome you, and I also welcome our kind of warm-up speaker next. So I'm very, very happy to invite on the stage David Altshuler. He was the first chair of GA4GH. He's a legend in human genetics, and he is someone who has continued his passion in science in the context not just of academia, but also in commerce. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Ewan. It's really wonderful to be here with you today. I'm going to comment on three things. I'm going to comment briefly on the past, the founding of GA4GH and the history. Then I'm going to talk about the present, which Ewan just described to you, which is very strong, and just maybe a couple of words about the future. The first thing that I want to talk about is the origins of this group. And it's rare that there's a single moment in time, a single day when something started. But in this case, there actually was a day. It was January 28th, 2013, and 50 people got together on a snowy day. Actually, if I remember correctly, the weather wasn't that good in New York City, from 8 countries. And we all got together because in varying groups, people have been talking about a world that we saw coming, where there would be a huge amount of genetic and genomic information and health data that would be collected across many different stakeholders in different countries and different organizations, and that we all knew that if you were going to learn from it, first of all, you would need to be able to combine and compare and learn, but also that from past history, there were both opportunities to do it right, and there were perhaps opportunities to not do it right, and absent us doing anything about it, perhaps it wouldn't turn out so well. And really at that meeting, it was a very interesting experience because we ended up writing together a white paper to try and organize our thoughts for the meeting. And that actually was the origin of GA4GH, because people started working on, I think it was a Google Docs, it's appropriate, Google Cloud, I think, is supporting it, but started editing together and came to some simple ideas. One is that the public interest would be best served if we worked together to figure out how to share and interpret and protect this genetic and genomic and health information. And that, I think, is more true today than it was on that day. And also some concepts emerged that from this cross-disciplinary discussion, because we didn't just bring together a group of scientists or a group of doctors or a group of technologists, but also had people from government, people from ethics, people from law, people from all sorts of, as many as we could with 50 people. And concepts such as respect and transparency and accountability, inclusivity, collaboration, innovation and agility as well. How would we move quickly and yet do it in the right way? And we also discussed a federated ecosystem, the idea that data would be collected and stored and managed by different parties around the world in an appropriate context for their local situation, and yet they would want to share. And what we were concerned about at the time was the idea that there might be monopoly positions that would be taken, or that somehow the control of this information would, if you think about what's the alternative to a federated system, it's either, I guess, a completely disconnected world where nothing can be learned or shared on the one hand, or a more monopolistic situation where one or a few parties would control all the information. I won't make any further comments except to say I think all of us are more educated today than we were back then about the risks of having too few players who control all such information outside of genomics, and maybe that has relevance to us. So we talked a lot about those things. Now, I think that if someone had said to us on that day that 6.5 years later you would be here today, I don't think any of us would have believed it. That there would be over 580 organizations, thousands of individuals, 50 countries, data collected not because of GA4GH, but nonetheless in the world at a faster pace even than I think we envisioned, and that there would be, the need even more today than we envisioned in 2013 for the discussion between patients and researchers and healthcare providers and companies and governments and the rest of the stakeholders that are here today. And even something I was really pleased to hear, Ewan, when you talked about the connection between HL7 fire and ISO. You know, sometimes people joke the only thing worse than no standard setting organizations is like, you know, to have a dozen standard setting organizations. But actually, even in 2013, where those groups were already out there, it wasn't clear who would be the ones that would be important to interact with, nor would it be clear that they would interact with each other. And I'm thrilled to hear that those connections and Elixir are being made, because it doesn't really matter so much. It matters that it's done right. It doesn't matter which group does it, but if it's done in 100 ways, then it's not done right. So that's wonderful to hear. I think we see continued tremendous learning about human biology, about diagnoses, about the importance of variant interpretation, which I think is still very much a work in progress, and the importance of secure standards for data exchange, for security, for trust, and this, I think, now ingrained idea of a federated ecosystem are all great accomplishments. I was pleased to be able to participate in the review of the driver projects, and there were too many good projects, not too few, which was a wonderful thing to see. And I also shared Ewan's comments, and I think everyone felt the same way who was involved in that, which was the diversity of projects, the diversity of approaches, the greater geographic breadth. Some disease focused, some national, some transnational, was really a wonderful thing. And I think we'll just build both this organization, but also in their local communities for their participation. So I was really pleased about that. So despite that great progress, there is so much to do. I think we are still certainly in the, if we're no longer, I mean, you and I, it is funny, I mean, I was thinking when you were standing up here, we met probably almost 20 years ago, and I don't think we ever could have imagined where we are today, but then the kind of things people talk about where maybe in 5 or 10 years there'll be tens of millions or hundreds of millions of genomes sequenced. I think that the world is going to continue to evolve rapidly, even more rapidly sometimes than we can keep up with. But when I think about what's needed, it's certainly to strengthen the progress made and make sure that we can learn. I think that, as you were saying, the need for clinical grade standards and the need for interactions and methods and tools and guidelines that can build trust, that can actually make it all the way to clinical care, is going to be a tremendous need and accomplishment. I do think, again, we have to remember to increase the diversity of data sets, both in terms of the people who are included in them, the different types of measures. I think that trust is just so incredibly important. There's a statement about credibility, and it's also true of trust. It can be built up slowly over time and dissipated in moments. And so I think that as fast as we go, I think that the steps that have been taken to build trust, which I think have been very successful on behalf of this organization, should always be maintained. The world will often swirl around us, but don't lose your true north, which I think you've done a great job doing. And finally, as I think about the future, what I'm most enthusiastic about is I do think work of this sort is best done by involving the communities. And by that, again, I mean both the national communities and international communities, but also the different disciplinary communities. And at the same time, it does take leadership. In other words, we could say, let's involve everybody, and if we don't involve the right people, we won't get anywhere. But on the other hand, if there aren't leaders, nothing happens. Because it does take passion, it does take follow-through, it does take the ability to organize and raise resources and to drive towards outcomes. And so I do want to thank a few people. I want to thank you, Ewan, for taking this on. And I think you are the exact right person at the exact right moment to do this. And I think it's showing in terms of both the concrete deliverables that are being created and also the continuing relationship building that will increase the likelihood that there's real impact. So I want to thank you for doing that. I want to thank the dedicated staff, because it's a small group of people who keep this thing going across time zones and across so many boundaries, and that's no small feat. And I want to thank Peter Goodhand because Peter Goodhand is the one true constant through this whole thing. And I remember first learning of him through Tom Hudson and trying to, actually didn't take much convincing because he got it right away given his past history working in a number of different environments. And you've really been the single person who's carried this through, and we owe you a great debt of gratitude. And I just thought I'd take a minute, if we could, just to thank Peter. So I think my one remaining task, thinking about the future, thinking in a visionary way, is I have a vision that there are cocktails outside of those doors. And I believe that I was given the opportunity to welcome you to this event and to encourage you to step outside and have cocktails and dinner and enjoy each other's company before the day starts again tomorrow. Thank you.